everyone! Today I'm going to go through my entire yarn stash and try to organize it. I don't have a very big stash. It all fits on the table right in front of me. Here, I don't really have that much yarn, which is probably surprising from someone who has owned a yarn store for 10 years. I just have a very small stash. But I know a lot of people struggle with, no matter what size yarn stash you've got, with keeping everything organized. And so I wanted to talk through that today. A big part of it is personal inspiration. I need to go through my yarn stash and get myself a little bit organized. And so I thought, why not? Why not give myself an excuse to do that and get started? So the first thing that I want to sort of think through myself, and maybe you guys can help me if you are joining along, drop me a comment to say how you organize your stash. What sort of categories do you put things in? There seem to be a couple of main ways that people do this. So I'm going to talk about the ones that I have heard of people using, and hopefully I will be inspired to choose one of those to organize my stash as I talk about it. So the first one, and the one that I think probably makes the most sense when people talk about organizing their yarn stash, is to organize it by thickness of yarn. And generally that's kind of how people shop for yarn. So if you're shopping in your own stash, or shopping in a store, a lot of people go with the thickness of yarn, is kind of how they get started. They know what thickness they need for the project that they're doing. And so organizing yarn by thickness is certainly one way that people go. I love it. People are saying that they're not organized. Neither am I. I put on a good show of it, but I'm really not. My secret to organization is to just not have very many things. That's the only way that I ever even pretend to be organized. So organizing by thickness is one way to do it. I know a lot of people will also organize by project. So if you know when you bought the yarn, you bought enough of it to make a sweater, you may have all of your sweater quantities of yarn in one area. And so they may be different thicknesses, some for chunkier sweaters, some for thinner yarn weight sweaters, but all of your yarn that's enough of it to make a sweater may go in one place versus all of your yarn to make socks with may go in one place, kind of a thing. Somebody else is saying they organize by the maker or the brand of yarn, which is another great option and way to do it, especially if you know you like certain brands for doing certain things with, or if you like to do projects that use multiple different colors. And so if you have several of one kind of yarn just in different colors, that can be great if you're going to do like a color work piece or something like that. So that is another option. The last option that I can think of that I hear people talk about is to organize by color. And so you'll have all of your white yarns, all of your red yarns, all of your blue yarns together that way. If I'm being honest, that one is the one for my personal stash that sort of appeals to me the most, is to organize by color. And that has a lot to do with how I store my yarn. So I will make sure to put up a picture, and I did to advertise for this video, the picture of my yarn storage. It's a pegboard. It's actually up really high on the wall. I wanted to do this video in front of the pegboard so I could actually sort of put them away as I was going, but I almost fell off the step stool and hurt myself while I was trying to set the camera up. So I decided bringing the yarn out would be a safer way to do that. Plus, I'll talk about one of the things that has to happen before I can put them back up on the pegs too, so I wouldn't actually been able to do it sort of live. So I have a big pegboard. It is spray painted turquoise. And then I have a million short little hooks that hang out of it. And so I put my balls of yarn I just put them on the hook so they hang on the pegs. And so I really like the way it looks. And when I originally set that up, I organized mine by color. So I started with the white yarns in the upper left corner and made my way down through almost like the rainbow of colors to end with like the dark blacks and browns in the bottom right hand corner. And so they went like white, red, orange, yellow, green, and it sort of like made this rainbow swoosh down the pegboard. And I loved the way that looks. The difficulty with that, with organizing by color, if your yarn is really visible, is when you add to the stash or take away from the stash, your colors get all mixed up, just because of how sort of coming in and going out happens. So I'm not sure if organizing by color is going to be the best option for me going forward, but I'll kind of have to see, kind of have to play with it a little bit. I have added to and taken away from that pegboard enough times that it was really pathetic looking, which is kind of why I decided I want to go through, I want to get everything down. Some of them have been hanging up there for several years now. I just wanted to get everything down and sort of reassess what would be the best way to do that. So I am going to go through a little bit of sort of what I have and talk about, just talk through live my thoughts as I'm trying to figure out how I want to do this. So what I did when I started off my organizing, and this was, I'm trying to think how many years ago. I would say this was at least 6 years ago. No, it would have been less than that, but probably 4 or 5 years ago. I judge it based on how old my kids are. It was after my first kid was born, but before my second kid was born. So it would have been between 3.5 and 5.5 years ago. When I first did that, I went through all of my stash, every single ball of yarn that was my personal yarn, that wasn't yarn that was for sale through the shop. And I wound them all into cakes. So that they would fit really nicely on those pegs. And then it was really pretty because I had this cascading rainbow of different colored yarns, which I really liked the look of. It was a little bit of a pain to wind 7 million things all into cakes, but once it was done, it was done. Well, the issue is since then, these are all skeins. These have not been caked up yet. And if you're, I dropped one on the floor. If you are not familiar with the terminology, a skein is like this. It's just a big loop of yarn. And what you have to do is you put it on a Swift and then wind it into a cake with like a little machine gizmo-y thing. And I don't really want to do that with, I'm probably not quite half and half. I probably have more that are in balls now, than in skeins, but it's close to 50-50. And I don't really love the idea of winding these all up into cakes, but I really like the visual. So I think I probably just need to get over it and do it anyways. The main component of my personal stash is hand spun. I am a spinner also, and that's actually where every single one of the skeins that I just held up the whole armful, all of those are added because I spun them. So when you're spinning, you use your, when it comes off of your spinning wheel, you put it into the loop to like wash it and let it dry and stuff. And so that's why every single one of these has been spun since I started my my wall o yarn. And so I would need to wind these all into cakes. What do you organize for your, for your yarn balls? This is what it's kind of the whole thing is there's not a wrong way to do it. The only real answer for how should you organize your balls of yarn is in a way that you will be able to find them when you want them. That's the only right answer. It can be by thickness, by brand, by color, by project that you plan to do with it. Or it can just be like oldest purchase date to to most recent purchase date. You can just have a tote and put all the yarn that you're buying into that tote. And then when that one's full, pull out the next one and start all over again. It's going to depend on how much yarn you have. I think it's easier to organize smaller amounts of yarn, just because it's not nearly as much to keep track of. And if your organization isn't perfect, but you don't have tons of it, it's easier to sort of fix the issue with the organization. If you messed it up somehow, you're not looking through 500 balls of yarn to get there. That's why I think for me, the cakes where they're all visible works really well, because I can see at a glance what all of my options are for yarn for a project that I'm gonna work on and gonna make. I can see them all out there because they're all visible. I don't have so many that they're sort of hidden away. So my personal preference is to have them somewhere where I can see at least most of them when I'm doing that. So I think what I am going to do to start with figuring out how I want to organize them is I think I'm going to sort mine into hand spun yarn and not hand spun yarn, just to kind of see how much I have of those two. I do have quite a bit of yarn, just yarn in general, and I have a lot of hand spun yarn versus other things. So I kind of just want to see how much I have. I also think it's a good idea to go through your yarn stash periodically to decide if there is yarn in it that you don't want anymore. Tastes change as you just as your lifestyle changes, you're in different life phases, your preferences for what you work with, what you like the feel of, what colors you like, what kinds of things you're making, and the trends for what is popular and what patterns are coming out with that that are sort of speaking to you. So I think going through your yarns probably every year would be a good idea, but since I don't do that, I can't tell you you should. Maybe every 5 years at the very, very least. And when you're doing that and you come across yarn that you know you do not want anymore, find it a new home. I'm going to take my advice on this. This is Angora. Angora makes me sneeze and it makes my eyes itch. I do not enjoy working with Angora yarn. This yarn is going to go find a new home with someone else who will enjoy it because it's a lovely soft yarn, natural fiber, all those good things. It is just not for me. And another thing that is going to fall into that camp is this is like a crochet cotton, a really thin 100% cotton. I'm just not working with yarns like this right now. That's just not the place I am in my life. So I'm just sorting out my hand spun versus not hand spun. I seem to have a lot of white hand spun yarn, which is interesting because I don't remember spinning all that much white, but I'm seeing a dyeing project in my future to dye it and make it a little bit more fun and vibrant to work with. I know a lot of people will also keep their yarn organized by sort of amount of yardage. Like these little balls, these are all 4 of these are hand spun yarns of mine, but there's not very much in any of these. These are all yarns that I did something else with, and this is what's left over. And so a lot of people will have sort of a bin that is smaller amounts of yarn. And so if you're looking for something to do stripes of color or like a contrast color with, you may like to pull out the yarns where there's not as much of it. I don't think that that's going to work for the way that I organize, but we'll see. I'm just making a stack of all of my hand spun versus not. Another top tip, don't throw away, don't throw away your ball bands. I was gonna say, I don't remember this yarn, couldn't tell you anything about it to save my life, but look what's inside. I was clever. I put the ball band inside of it. So it's a silky mulberry. It's 100% mulberry silk. So I'm very glad that I kept that because this is a really lovely yarn. I love silk. I feel like everybody loves silk, but yeah, keep the ball bands. I did not think that that was in there. I thought I just wouldn't know the answer to what that was. This is some hand spun cotton, which is, I should like be a prized possession because I did not enjoy spinning cotton and I will never spin it again. But this was yarn that I spun for my first nephew. I was going to make him something out of hand spun yarn. I think that kid is like 8 years old now and it's still yarn. I mean, 8-year-olds wear hats, right? I guess it's not too late. And this is another, like, I spun the yarn, but I've actually made my husband and one of my kids a hat with this yarn. So I've used a good amount of it. Here's another Angora that I'm going to put in the pile to pass along to somebody else. And I think this is my gigantic stack of cashmere blended with all kinds of different things that I spun for a long time because I really loved the way it felt. And now it's the special thing. It's like it's too precious to actually work with. So it's just sat for 10 years. I want to work on that so that I actually do use the yarn that I make. I think I'm getting to the end. I think this is all the last of my hand spun yarn. Ooh, this one has sparkles. This one looks kind of unicorny. See, this is another good reason to organize your stash. I like the tip. Somebody said they always tie their ball bands in with the yarn so you don't lose them. That would be another good way to do it, and probably make it more visible so I knew that I still had it. So all of that is my hand spun. I probably have twice as much hand spun as I have not hand spun, and the not hand spun is a huge variety of different things. This was the yarn leftover from making my wedding shawl. So I've been married for 10 years. So I have a lot of, sort of vintage stash would be what I would call it. Old stuff that's been around for a long time that I just can't bear to part with, almost like sentimental yarn. But I don't personally have in my stash tons of yardage. Like I don't have a sweater's quantity worth of yarn. That's just not, if I buy a sweater's quantity worth of yarn, I start the sweater right away and then I end up with whatever was left on that. So that is the entirety of my yarn stash. You saw me moving the hand spun yarn across. There's about half that much of the not hand spun over here. So it's not huge, but I think going through it and seeing how much there is, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put half of my wall display on the pegboards is going to be the hand spun, and then half of it is going to be commercial yarns. And then I'm thinking I'm going to do that same like color gradient. I'm going to start with the white, and then I just do the rainbow just because it's easy for me to remember, like the red, orange, yellow, blue, green, and then down to the dark colors at the bottom for one side. And then I'm going to do the other way. I'm going to start with the dark and go backwards through the colors and in with the light on the other side. So there'll be two color gradients that cross. Is my vision right now. That does involve winding a lot of yarn to make that happen. So I will need some accountability for this. Hopefully I will be able to make another video showing you, or at least share a picture of the finished product. And who knows, I may need to do a how to wind yarn sort of a chat because I do think there's a bit of an art form to that. So I hope that this was helpful to kind of talk through and watch me think through how would be the best way for me to organize my stash. And like I said before, this is going to be different for every single person. And 5 years from now, when I'm doing this again, it will be different for me again. It's about sort of looking at what you have and thinking about the way you use it to organize. For me, if I'm being completely honest with myself, the way that I use my stash is as art. I like to look at it. I have, especially with my hand spun, I really enjoy the spinning of it, but I don't have a lot of hours in the day right now to actually be working with my hand spun yarn. So for me, my stash is much more about enjoying the look of the yarn and seeing visually all of the things that I have done. And then almost all of my commercial yarns, like this I got on the last time my husband and I went to England, where he's from. So almost all of my my hand spun yarn, or my commercial yarns that I didn't spin, are like sentimental yarns. And so those are nice to look at and see as almost like a display art piece as well. But I'm certainly aware that I'm probably in the minority with that. That is not how most people use their yarn stashes. So organize yours the way that works the best for you.